On the outside, the Swift sports a sleek and modern design. Suzuki have introduced a new Horizon design line that wraps around the vehicle, creating a sense of motion. Rounded shoulder lines give it a sporty edge, while the iconic Suzuki badge proudly sits at the front of the bonnet. Lower headlight positions and L-shaped daytime running lights not only enhance visibility, but also add a touch of sophistication. And check out those clear rear tailgate lights.
7:30.
Good morning, this is ABC Ballarat and Southwest Victoria News. I'm Jean Bell. The emergency department and a maternity unit at Ballarat's private hospital says it couldn't take new admissions over the weekend due to network outages. St John of God says all patients in its care were safe and it's working to resolve the issue, but the outage affected its ability to admit new patients. The main line has since been restored and the maternity unit began accepting new patients yesterday afternoon. The hospital says it is working to restore all services. A Western Victorian farmer says the weekend's rain has been a game changer and has given him new hope. The Bureau of Meteorology's latest drought statement shows a majority of Victoria experienced serious, severe or record low rainfall deficiencies in the 17 months to the end of June. Wimmera landholder Graham Marr farms near Hall's Gap and he says he recorded 50 millimetres of rain across his property. He says the weekend's rain has given a new hope for this season's crops.
That's the best rain we've had in 18 months by a long way. We've had enough rain in June and all that and little small ones to sort of get things going, but it's all gone in, nothing's run off. And as Beth described, we're back in the game.
Water restrictions will be eased in Apollo Bay, Marengo and Skeens Creek from this Friday following a rise in storage levels. Apollo Bay has been under water restrictions since early April. Water storage levels reached a low of 20% in early June before rain lifted the levels back to 68%. Australian health provider 4Health says the federal government's move to lift bulk billing rates will mean more people will be able to afford to see a doctor. Eureka Medical and Dental Centre in Ballarat is the first clinic in its network to transition back to 100% bulk billing as a result of the federal government's $8 billion commitment to lift bulk billing rates nationwide. 4Health Chief Executive Andrew Cohen says he had seen a 30% decline in visitations when his clinics moved from bulk billing to mixed billing. Mr. Cohen says new patients at the Ballarat Centre will save about $500,000 in a year under the new move from the government.
Under the current settings, bulk billing is a very difficult business model. When we move forward from November 1st, the changes that the government made actually make a career as a bulk billing GP just as attractive, if not more attractive, than a private billing.
The SES is continuing to clean up damage after wild weather hit parts of the state late on Friday. State Duty Officer Jerry Sheridan says the service received 530 calls as volunteers worked through Friday night, mainly in central and western Victoria, to clear fallen trees and damaged buildings. Bacchus Marsh volunteers were forced to retreat to safety due to tree branches falling around them as the winds intensified. Mr. Sheridan says elevated areas were most affected.
It's been a phenomenal job by the volunteers out and about, mainly, as you said, in that western area. Some of those key areas being around that Kilmore, Gisborne, Ballarat, Wood End, and they've probably been our busiest units.
Victoria's peak body for the wood fibre industry says it's eager to speak to the state government about market challenges the industry is facing. On Friday, wood supplier Forest One announced it would close its dry sawmill and particle board manufacturing operations in Benalla in the state's northeast. It says it hopes to begin full production again in the future if and when demand returns for its products. Victorian Forest Products Association CEO Andrew White says the industry is feeling the impacts of a depressed housing market.
We're seeing build times for houses have blown out from around 6 months to 10 months. So whilst there might be more homes being started, they're not being completed as quickly. What that does is obviously it means that there's an impact on those suppliers.
And Rural Councils Victoria says state representatives need to hear what its members have to say about managing housing challenges and infrastructure needs. The issues are set to be key discussion points at RCV's annual forum this week, alongside childcare and financial sustainability. RCV Chair Rob Amos says the forum will take place in Yarrawonga and include speakers from state government.
Our members will be able to directly ask to the people who are running these programs about what their problems are, and hopefully that feedback can be taken on board, and when they're doing these programs, the state government can take that information and implement it.
A man will face court today charged with firearm offences following a shooting in Western Victoria yesterday morning. Emergency services were called to a Kings Avenue property in St Arnaud after 7 o'clock following reports of a dispute. A 40-year-old St Arnaud man was taken to hospital with a non-life-threatening gunshot injury to his upper body. Yesterday afternoon, a 37-year-old man was arrested in Lake Bolac, and he faces a number of charges, including firearm offences and theft of a motor vehicle. A Ballarat-based manufacturer of heavy rescue trucks is expected to appear in court next month as it fights allegations made by Victoria's State Emergency Service. Eden Hennanen reports.
The SES says court proceedings against SEM Fire and Rescue in Wendouree and national company Varley Specialised Vehicles started in 2022. It alleges the companies breached their contractual obligations to design and manufacture heavy rescue trucks that would meet the emergency services operational requirements. The SES says SEM and Varley deny liability and have defended the claim. The matter is expected to be given a trial date at the next hearing in August. SEM and Varley has been contacted for comment.
A Central Victorian Shire has put forward 3 council-owned properties for potential sale and future use as affordable housing. Julia Bergin reports.
In a council meeting tonight, Hepburn Shire Council will decide whether to sell 7 properties it no longer needs. The properties are located in Dalesford, Creswick and Clunes, and 3 have been deemed suitable for affordable housing projects. Almost all of the properties earmarked for disposal are vacant land. In total, they measure over 20,000 square metres. Council has earmarked the land as surplus and hopes to reinvest any profits into its capital works program. Councillors will vote on the motion to sell the properties this evening.
Police are appealing for information on an aggravated burglary at an Ararat address earlier this month. Police believe the offenders entered the Port Fairy Road property at about 2:30 in the morning of July 10th, stealing 2 e-bikes. The police are yet to determine whether there were multiple offenders involved and are calling on the public to help identify those responsible. An Indigenous language advocate says she's hopeful the renaming of a creek in Western Victoria will lead to more offensive place names being replaced. More than 3 years ago, Eastern Maar Aboriginal Corporation requested Moyne Shire Council rename Lubra Creek near Caramit. The site is the location of a massacre of Indigenous women and children, and Lubra is a term that denigrates Indigenous women. Goodnitchamara and Jabberong woman Yaron Cousins Bundle says she hopes there will be a community event soon to mark the official renaming of the creek to Thunambul Tuke Creek, which means Women and Children's Creek.
We hope that this is the start of an ongoing process about helping to restore the dual naming or the renaming of different places across Goodnitchamara country and Jabberong country and different other nations across the state.
Moyne Shire Council Deputy Mayor Jordan Lockett says people or organisations are invited to approach the council about place names. A new nationwide code of practice for logging trucks is now in force with a focus on improving safety. Log trucks are a regular sight on southwest Victorian roads, transporting wood to local mills or the Port of Portland. Jennifer Roltelli from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator says the code of practice was an initiative of growers and contractors who wanted a best practice guide for the diverse industry. She says it's recognised good safety means good productivity.
Most transport businesses in this industry recognise that doing things safely is also better for productivity because it means less time off-road, attending to badly loaded loads that have to be redone or, heaven forbid, time off for injuries or for accidents.
And 2 southwest Victorian councils yesterday fronted a state government inquiry into fraud and corruption control in local government. Southern Grampian Shire and Warrnambool City were 2 of the 19 councils questioned over their management of grants, funding and conflict of interest disclosures. The inquiry follows 2 Victorian Auditor-General's reports into fraud and corruption in local government.
Farmers in the Ararat rural city area will benefit from a 40% rates reduction after the council voted through the measure at a meeting last night. A council report says the Victorian government will provide a lump sum payment to council as part of its drought support package, and it will be up to the council how this is used. Councillors voted unanimously for the change, calling it a huge win for primary producers. Farmers are vowing to stop transmission line builders from using their land, despite the threat of large fines and police action from new legislation before state parliament. The Victorian government plans to strengthen existing land access rights for companies building electricity infrastructure in the state, with legislation expected to be debated this week. Beck Legal Property and Development Director John Ennis says the legislation would give the state more powers to enforce access rights on farms, unless there are reasonable circumstances to deny it.
With that, you would be looking at the actual operation of the farm or safety concerns that they have or biosecurity concerns. Realistically, not wanting the project to go ahead is not going to be reasonable circumstances.
The Department of Transport says it is aware of potholes on a West Victorian road, with maintenance crews working to fix the damage. Residents have reported having to pull over and change tyres due to potholes on the Creswick-Melbourne Road in Wattle Flat and along the Western Highway at Gordon. Department of Transport Executive Director for Barwon South Western Grampians, Michael Bailey, says crews are inspecting this stretch of the Western Highway and performing maintenance as required. The Municipal Association of Victoria has accused the state government of widespread cost shifting to councils for community events. Tyrone Dalton reports.
2 Anzac Day parades in central Victoria were forced to scramble to afford new government-imposed costs to do with traffic management made in 2023. The changes in legislation mean only companies with accreditation can manage traffic at events, rather than volunteers, which had been done in the past. The Bassendean Ranges Shire, where the parades are scheduled to be held, says costs are in the thousands of dollars. Deputy President of the Municipal Association of Victoria, Ruth Gastrain, says these costs are crushing local festivals and parades.
It's blatant cost shifting. There hasn't been any discussion with the sector about how these events are meant to be funded.
The Victorian government has been contacted for comment.
A regional Victorian university says the state southwest can expect to see increased access to psychological treatment and psychological testing, following a nearly 9% increase in Master of Psychology enrolments. Ballarat's Federation University says there will now be more students completing their mandatory 12 months of placement as provisional psychologists in regional and rural settings. Professor Megan Jenkins says the 67 provisional psychologists training at the university this semester are the most they've ever had.
Been able to increase the number of psychologists on the ground in places like Ballarat, Ararat, Horsham, Warrnambool. The more people that we can train here, the more that we can increase those services to the region.
A Southwest Victorian wildlife shelter is calling on residents to sign a petition for a road levy charge to help care for native animals hit by cars. It's proposing a $2 levy for each registered Victorian vehicle, which would then go towards wildlife shelters. The petition, which has nearly 3,500 signatures, closes today. Winchelsea wildlife shelter operator Barbara Rayland says she gets called out to assess injured animals on roads almost every day.
We need to look after our animals to look after ourselves. It's all about working in harmony and people just to take care on the road and just be mindful that there are animals out there and they don't know what cars are.
A regional Victorian bowls club has backed a global campaign to have lawn bowls included in the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Lawn bowls has been played in Australia since 1845 and there are more than 1,800 clubs that host nearly 2 million participants each year. Ballarat Highlands Bowls Region Chairman Lloyd Sims says although Queensland is the leading state for elite bowls, regional Victoria has some very strong talent.
Be a worthwhile contribution given the number of participants in the game overall. It's a very popular game. It's not only now, certainly in the older generations, but the uptake in the junior levels is growing quite yearly, in fact.
A rise in abuse and harassment aimed at Victorian councillors has sparked concerns not enough is being done to deal with it. Charlotte Wilkes reports.
Across the state, a growing number of councillors are reporting threats, abuse and harassment from residents and ratepayers. The councillors say that unless they're in immediate life-threatening situation, they have no protection and no way to make it stop. The ABC spoke to 22 councillors from 14 Victorian councils, with many reporting a lack of help from Victoria Police, WorkSafe, the local government inspectorate and the Safety Commissioner. Victoria Police would not comment on the number of abuse allegations it received from councillors or its ability to resource investigations. A police spokesperson said all questions about protection of councillors should be sent to local government, and a Victorian government spokesperson said all threats or criminal activity should continue to be referred to Victoria Police. Hundreds of Victorian farmers have returned with their tractors to the steps of Parliament to protest transmission line projects earmarked for the western and northern part of the state. Farmers say they vow to stop projects such as the VNI West and Western Renewables Link from using their land, despite the threat of a $12,000 fine and police action from new legislation before state parliament. Kingston farmer Ben Charlson says farmers are fed up and won't stop protesting until the government stops the towers from going ahead. He says the only way he will allow the transmission lines on his property are if they're underground.
Everyone's sick of it. They've definitely had enough. We've got jobs to do too, and we'd like to move on and just continue what we're doing, which is growing food for all Victorians.
The CEO of Australia's first dedicated environmental art space has resigned less than a year into the role. Pippa Mott has quit her role as the head of Wama Foundation 3 weeks after it opened the National Centre for Environmental Art and Native Australian Garden at Halls Gap. Ange Terrell, who has been involved with the gallery and garden for several years, will become the interim CEO. Ms Terrell, who will be returning from Western Australia to take up the role, while Ms Mott makes time to pursue her own art projects. Thieves have stolen wheels from a Ballarat Community Health fleet car that is used to transport nurses to remote and vulnerable community members. 2 wheels were stolen from a vehicle on Monday night at their Lucas branch around 1 a.m. The organisation says the theft has not only damaged a key community health resource, but directly disrupted care to those who rely on outreach services. Community Health's Fleet and Facility Officer Drew Mason says it's a low act.
It's really frustrating because the fleet utilisation is quite high. So to have one out of action sort of severely limits things like doing that outreach, meeting clients at their place, transporting clients to where they need to go.
Warrnambool City Council says it will endeavour to keep all stakeholders in the loop during a newly announced flood study after councillors rejected the findings of a previous project. The state government has awarded a $250,000 grant to the council to undertake a flood study in North Warrnambool near the Mary River, covering Bushfield and Woodford. In June, councillors voted to abandon a South Warrnambool flood study after councillors decided they did not trust the data. Warrnambool City Council Director of City Futures, Luke Coughlin, says flood studies can be very complicated with significant impacts on communities if flood overlays are proposed over properties.
We very much appreciate how complex and the number of different stakeholders that need to be engaged, and we'll be endeavouring to really make sure that everyone has their say throughout this project.
The latest 2025 NAPLAN results show, on average, the further away a student is from metropolitan Melbourne, the lower the average score. Jean Bell reports.
Throughout all age groups tested, students in Metro Melbourne scored higher than students in inner and outer regional areas, while remote areas had the lowest scores. Victoria University Senior Research Fellow Dr. Andres Molina says this is a persistent trend.
Students living in remote and rural communities face disproportionate barriers to learning.
He says the key to bridging the learning gap is having fully serviced schools, which provide nursing, dental and mental health care so that barriers to attending school are removed.
A coroner has found no clear cause of death for a woman who died last year consuming magic mushrooms at a regional Victorian health retreat. Matt Neal reports.
Rachel Dixon died in April 2024 after drinking mushroom tea at the Soul Barn Health Retreat in Clunes. A coroner's report released this week found no clear cause of death, but concluded there was a possibility her death was linked to psilocybin use. The coroner cited research from the Australian Psychedelic Society on woodlover paralysis, which is a condition of muscle weakness linked to magic mushroom consumption, to conclude there was a possible relationship between the drug and her death. However, the coroner said there was no way to conclusively prove the link and made no formal recommendations relating to Ms Dixon's death.
The owner of the Soul Barn, Deanne Matthews, is not facing any charges in relation to Miss Dixon's death. A driver has lost his licence after crashing his car in southwest Victoria while allegedly 5 times over the legal alcohol limit. Eden Hennanen reports.
Police responded to reports a car had veered off the Warrnambool-Cobden Road at Eckland South, west of Warrnambool on Wednesday night. The car went through mud and crashed into a tree around 10 o'clock. The 22-year-old driver was not injured and allegedly attempted to hide from police when they arrived. The Camperdown man was taken to a police station where he produced a blood alcohol reading of 0.28. His licence was immediately suspended for 12 months and he's expected to be charged on summons with driving offences.
The Victorian Lower House has voted in favour of passing legislation which would strengthen existing land access rights for companies building electricity infrastructure in the state. If the legislation passes through the Upper House, farmers could face up to $12,000 worth of fines and police action if they refuse transmission line builders from using their land. National Party's Danny O'Brien says the bill was fast-tracked through Parliament with only 2 hours of debate.
Government obviously and all its Labor rural and regional members all voted in favour of that legislation, so irrespective of what they're saying in their communities, they have voted for a very draconian response to get their transmission policies through.
The Minister for Agriculture says authorised officers will always work with landowners before accessing land, and legislation will prevent inappropriate behaviour from private transmission companies. Regional communities and farmers are being sent information about what happens when renewable projects finish. The Renewable Energy Alliance has sent out packs with details about refurbishment, repowering and decommissioning projects. While the ultimate decision for a project remains with developers, Realliance hopes its initiative will better equip farmers to have their say about projects. Realliance National Director Andrew Bray says empowering communities is a crucial part of obtaining social license in the renewables transition.
The more that people feel that they are part of the discussion, the more that they feel that they know what the levers are that they can pull, the more that they feel confident being part of the transition as it rolls out.
Workers at Portland Aluminium in southwest Victoria have voted to take protected industrial action after a breakdown in negotiations with Alcoa over pay and conditions. Alcoa has reportedly offered a 12% pay rise over 3 years, but the Australian Workers' Union says the increase is at the expense of workers' conditions. The industrial action will feature rolling 6-hour stoppages and is expected to run for 48 hours from 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. Victorian AWU branch president Ross Kenner says the action was a last resort following 16 weeks of failed negotiations.
Our big issue is the proposed agreement would see a massive reduction in the rights that the workers have fought for over the past 40 years.
Demolition work has begun at the Warrnambool Base Hospital ahead of a redevelopment budgeted to cost almost $400 million. 3 older buildings will be torn down to make way for a new multi-storey clinical services building. The project is expected to take around 2.5 years to complete. For more news, search for your local ABC station online.
Unleash your vehicle's power beyond limits. Discover our exclusive range of Yuasa automotive batteries, engineered for unparalleled reliability and performance to power your journey like never before. Battery World. Power your passion.